Hello, welcome to the next lesson that we're going to be covering after the checkmate in one. So this is for you if you have actually solved at least 100 puzzles. If you've not solved up to 100 checkmates in one, then this is not for you. Go back and solve the 100 checkmates in ones that I told you to solve in the previous video. So in this position, you're still looking for the same thing that you were doing, but this time around you have to approach it a little bit differently. So we're going to still use the same scanning technique that we did from left to the right to see if we have any check. Now we have okay, so we're going to start with the pawn, right? The pawns obviously can't do check, so you can just ignore it. So that's why I instantly just consider the queen first. Queen can go to h5, it's going to be a check. Queen can go to h4, it's going to be a check, and queen can go to h3, it's going to be a check. Now that's along this side. Now what of moving forward, queen can actually take this rook and it's going to be a check. Now the next piece we want to look at, this rook cannot do a check. It's impossible for this rook to do a check. This rook also cannot do a check, right? This pawn cannot do a check. This bishop cannot do a check. The king is on a light square. So now the thing is, what are we going to play in this position, right? We're going to do a check, or this check, or this check. Remember, these are all the checks that we looked at. So we're going to start now. This one, you're not just looking for a checkmate in one, you're looking for a checkmate in two. So you have to now sit down and ask yourself, okay, what is going to, you're not only looking at where can the king go, you're looking at what will black play, right? And this is the next step that you need to improve your visualization. This is the easiest next step that you're going to need to improve your visualization. Once you can master checkmate in two, we're not even going to look at checkmate in three, right? We're not going to look at checkmate in 4 or 5. Next things we're going to look at is checkmate patterns. So once you can understand checkmate in two, it means that you are becoming very good now. You're becoming very good, and I'm happy for your progress. Okay, so let's start with the queen takes, right? These are all the checks again. So let's start with queen takes rook. Queen takes rook check. He's definitely going to take the queen. And the thing is that we don't have enough pieces to do an attack right now, because it was only the queen and this bishop that were close to the king side. So losing our queen is not a very good sacrifice, because after takes, what happens? We don't have any other check. We literally don't have any other check. This bishop can't even attack the king. This rook cannot attack the king, which is going to take. So going queen sack is just going to be a bad move. Now what is the other check that we looked at, right? These are the other checks. So going queen here, okay, the question is, what can he play, right? Going queen to h4 check, can he go here? The answer is no, because this bishop is on its way. Can you see, right? So the bishop is on the way of the king, and the king cannot go to g1. Now what is he going to play after this check? He cannot move up, because if he moves up, the queen is just going to take the king, which is not possible, and it's just going to be an illegal move. So what is he going to play? He's just going to block with the rook. Remember, when we discussed the concept of checks and checkmates, I said if you're under a check, or you're doing a check for your opponent, there are 3 things that can happen. He can either move the piece, of which is not possible right now, right? He can't move this king anywhere. And the second thing is, you can capture the piece that is doing the check. Can he capture the queen? The answer is no, right? And the last thing is block. You can block the check. And in this position, the only thing that he can play is blocking the king from the check. And once he blocks the king from the check, what are we going to do? We cannot take, right? We cannot take, because if we take, there's a queen over here, and the king can even also capture, and we're still in the same thing, right? We're still in the same thing where you sacked the rook, the queen for the rook, and the bishop cannot do a checkmate on its own. So what are we going to do now? If the queen goes here and he blocks, we don't have anything to do. But if the queen goes here, he still plays the same block. Do we have any check? We could have a check with the queen being here. Now this might be difficult if immediately after the checkmate in one you just came to this video, but if you actually truly sat down and did about 100 puzzles, it might not be in just one day, right? But if you've done at least 100 puzzles on checkmate in ones, this one should not be very difficult. Now what you're going to be looking at is, okay, after this check, The king cannot move here. So the question is, we already know that this is going to happen. So going check here, we might capture this knight, but he still blocks, and we've done 2 moves and it's not a checkmate. So don't even stress yourself calculating further, right? Once you see that, okay, after this check and he blocks, what other check do we have? If you look closely, you're going to see that there's a check here and there's also a check here. And going here, the rook just captures. Going here, the rook just blocks, or even the queen can even block. So we have made 2 moves. This was the first move, he blocked, and this was the second move, and it was not still a checkmate. So we're just going to move that out. Now, the next one we're going to look at is this check on h3. Now, going h3, we know that he's forced to move here, and going here now releases something. If you check all the possible squares, the queen can do a check from here. You're going to see that this is going to be an option, right? And if you go check, he's forced to go here. This rook is not protected, so we can actually do the checkmate. Another thing that you want to make sure you do is don't move your piece until you see the checkmate. Don't just be like, okay, I think this is good, and then you just move the piece. No, that's going to be very, very wrong. You want to make sure that you see the checkmate before you move your piece. Now we're going to go here, and lastly, we're going to play this. And you can see the position became a little bit clearer. We can take this, and this is just going to be checkmate. If we had gone here, it's just going to be bad. Now let me show you what I meant. The king cannot move quite all right, but after this we don't have any check. We don't have, okay, we have a check actually. Well, if we go check, he just blocks with the queen, and it's not a checkmate until we can't even capture the knight right now. So going there is just going to be bad. What happened if he had gone this way? If he had gone this way, check, now he can grab the knight though. Well, after this, still the same thing happens. He blocked, and it's not a checkmate. If we take, he takes. That's not going to be a checkmate, and we have made 3 moves. It has to be a checkmate in 2. So when you play a move, the next move has to be a checkmate. That's the checkmate in 2. So it's very important that you understand how to do a checkmate in 2. It's very, very, very important, because when you now start looking at other patterns, checkmate patterns, when you start looking at checkmate patterns, it's going to be much more easier for you. In this position, same thing, it's black's turn to play. White just moved the king over here, and we're going to start. The pawns, obviously, these pieces are out of the equation. They cannot do any check, but we have rooks and bishop. Okay, so the bishop can do a check, right? Or we can start with the rook, but let's just start with the bishop. The bishop can do a check, the rook can do a check, this rook can do 2 checks over here, and these are all the possible checks. You can see we just quickly scan them through, and once you practice this from the checkmate in 1, like scanning from left to right, in 100 puzzles, you're going to be as fast as you're going to figure out all the possible checks as fast as I just did right now, right? So these are all the possible checks, and the question is, we're looking for a checkmate in 2, right? So now let's say we go here. What is going to happen? The king takes. Any move that we're going to play after that has to be a checkmate. So the question is, what is going to be a checkmate? Now we're on a dark square, so this bishop cannot even do a check. It has to be with the rook, and the only squares the rook can do a check is here and here, of which is going to get captured. If rook takes and king takes, now king takes, the bishop just captures, right? If rook takes, king goes here, the king just captures the rook again, and it's just going to be bad for black, right? We're looking for a checkmate in 2. In this position, rook doesn't work, and now we look for the other check. There's no other check with the rook, so with this rook, go in here. We know that the bishop captures, but the question is, what other check are we going to do? If we go check over here, now this rook is not in this line, so we can even move out. So it's not going to be a checkmate in 2, right? The next one we're going to look at is going here, check. The king can actually just take. The king just takes. Even if you go check here, I even forgot, the king can even take the rook, because right now you're going to see that the rook is hanging. So this check does not work. This check does not work because the rook takes. What about this check? If you go here, check, the rook takes. If you go check, the rook can take, the rook can move here, the rook can move here, and just keep on running. So this is also not going to be a checkmate, right? Now, the last piece we're going to look at is, after this, we know that the bishop takes, the king takes, is just going to be bad, because after even he takes, we can just run away. We can run away to a lot of squares. So taking is just going to be bad. Lastly, it's going to be this check. Now, this check, this is a little bit tricky now. Okay. This is a little bit tricky, because if you get to this point, there's what we call pins. Now, this is going to be a check. This pawn cannot capture. This pawn cannot capture. Why is that? Because if the pawn decides to capture, then what is going to happen? He's opening up the line for his king. The king cannot capture because the pawn is protecting. So when you're doing a checkmate in 2, it's on another level. It's not on the same level with checkmate in 1. So you have to be careful. All of the pieces are playing a little or important role that you must always take note of. So in this position, let's say we go rook to d4 check. The king cannot capture. We know that the pawn cannot capture also. So the question is, where can the king move to? Now this is called a pin. This pawn is pinned to the king, right? The pawn cannot move the line of the king because he's just going to get captured. So that's called a pin. Now, after we go rook check, where can the king go? The king cannot go here. Why? Because of the bishop again. The king cannot go here because of the rook. The rook is just going to be on this file. So all these moves are even cancelled. Now, the only possible move for the king is over here. And when you play this move and the king goes here, you still do the same thing. What are all the possible checks that can happen now? The king is over here, and you see that the bishop can go here, and here it's going to be a check. But if we go here, what happens? He just blocks with the pawn, and it's not a checkmate. Remember, after this move, if he moves, any move that you're going to play has to be a mate. So if you look closely, you're going to see that this move just is going to be bad because of pawn push. The rook can also even take the bishop, which is going to be very bad. Now, what if he decides to go here? After rook check, he goes here, and then bishop goes here. The king cannot take, because now this rook is going to be protecting this bishop. Okay, this was actually a very difficult puzzle. Okay, so this rook is going to be protecting this bishop, so it's not going to be a bad idea. But the question is, after the check, right? So check, king goes here, check. Can he move anywhere? No, the king cannot go here because of our king, cannot go here because of the pawn, cannot go here because of the bishop, cannot move up because of the rook, cannot go here because of our pawn again. So that's just going to be a checkmate. So let's go here and here. Remember, always look at the checkmates before you play the move. Now, when you're solving your puzzles, sorry, this puzzle was a little bit difficult, but I just took it down to easier. This is going to be much more easier. In this position, you're still looking for a checkmate. What is going to be the checkmate in 1 that you're seeing here? Now you can see the king is limited in movement. The king cannot go backwards, although the king can move here and also here. So any move that we're playing has to stop the king from moving here and also towards this side, right? So if you come up with this and the king moves out, you have to see a checkmate in 1. So any move that you're playing has to stop this 2 from happening. Or even if it's going to happen, you have to see a checkmate that is going to follow up. Now, let's say you decide to go queen. Here is the first check. Remember, we're not considering the pawns. By now, you should be an expert already to know that considering the pawns is just not going to yield anything, even the king, right? So you only have the queen and the rook, and that's all. These 2 pawns also cannot do a check. Now, looking at all the possible checks, you already see this, this, and this, and this. These are all the checks. And we have the queen and the rook. Now, any check. Okay. Now, one of the rules of attack is that you must have at least 2 pieces in the attack in order to do a checkmate. So, losing your queen is just going to leave you with only your rook, and you don't have any officer to support the rook in doing the checkmate. Losing your rook also results in the same thing, right? So, going here, check. You know that the king just takes. It's just going to be bad. Going here, check. The queen takes. Now, going here and here looks promising. Going here is cancelled because the pawn takes and the king even also takes, and there's no checkmate. So it's either going to be between these 2. So what happens if the king goes here, right? We said he cannot move backwards, cannot move here, 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 or here. He moves here. But the question is, does he have another check? The king is going to be here. Our queen is going to be here. Do we have another check? Yes, we have a check, but it's a checkmate, because any check that we're going to do now has to be a checkmate. This is not going to be a checkmate, but this is a check. The king just takes backwards. If we take this pawn, the king just takes backwards also. What other check do we have? We have this check. The queen can just take, and you're going to see that there's no actually any checkmate if you take this pawn. Now you want to look at the other one. Now sometimes this is something that is going to happen, especially during this stage. You're going to be looking for the answer, but you're not going to. You're just going to be calculating, and you feel like it's just an endless calculation, right? Once you see that, okay, you're not finding the answer, just move on to another possibility. Don't just play it because it looks good, even though you don't find the answer, right? Look for another possibility. Now, this was the other possibility, right? Check. And if we go check on h4, the only move that he has now is going here or blocking with the pawn. Now, if we go here and he blocks with the pawn, who can see the checkmates? Okay, just take some seconds to find the checkmates. Now, going pawn push opened up this pawn, and now we can just take this pawn, and the king is going to be under attack and cannot move here. And this is going to be like a 2 rooks checkmate, but this time with the queen and rook and with pieces on the board, right? So going here, check. moves forward, and then we take this pawn, it's going to be a checkmate. Now, if we go here, the question is, what if he moves here? What are we going to play? Now, queen, all the way, you still look for all the possible checks. Now, I would advise, if it's possible, if you have a chessboard, you can set up the position, and then for the first few puzzles that you're going to be solving, for the first 20 puzzles you're going to be solving, when you find an idea, you play the move and then look for a checkmate in one, right? When you find an idea, when you look at all the possible checks, play the move and then look for the checkmate in one. So for instance, in this position, if you set this position up on your chessboard and look at all the possible checks, just play the checks and play whatever the computer is going to play. Or no, don't play what the computer is going to play, because don't play it when you're solving the puzzle. Just play it on the board. It's not a good habit though, but it's just for now. It's just something that you're going to do now, and once you just master it, you want to stop doing it as soon as possible. So once you see this check, play the check, and in the position you play what do you think white is going to play, right? And if you see that the move is just, the game is keeping like it's still going, right, then it means that that's not the move, right? Look at this and you ask yourself, what is white going to play? You now see that is not going to happen. He cannot it's just going to take, and there's no checkmate. And then you look at all these options, you play this move, and if the king, you look for the best move for white, you're going to notice that this is the only square that white can go, aside sacrificing the queen. The queen goes back, then there's just going to be a pin. So and rook cannot go back also because we lose the rook. So after this check, the king moves up, and you set the position with the king over here and the queen over here, and then ask yourself, okay, there's a checkmate in one. I have to find this. Remember, it's a checkmate in two, so you just exhausted one move, and there has to be a checkmate on the next move. If you can't find it, this is not going to be the best move, right? And then you look at this also. Okay, what are the moves that he can play? He can play this, he can play this. If he goes here, set the position up with the queen over here, I'm pretty sure you're going to see the answer. Now, if you're not seeing the answer, the reason, and you've done the mate in one, like up to 100 puzzles, is because you're still in the process of understanding like how to visualize, right? So once you do this, and once you follow these approaches that I've given you, it's going to be a very, very easy process for you. You're just going to start solving checkmate in two like a grandmaster, and then we're going to move on to the next topics that we are going to be treating, which is the mating patterns. Now, there are lots of mating patterns like the Anesthesia's mates, Arabian mates, Bowden's mates, Blind Swine's mates, back rank mates, and there's just a lot. There are about 30, but we're going to look at each and every one of them. So stay tuned and make sure you do 100 of checkmate in one and another 100 of checkmate in two. You want to make sure that you master the checkmate in two, and even if you don't master it to some point, just do at least up to 100. If you do up to 100, you've gotten a certain level of mastery, even if it's not the perfect level of mastery that we want, but you've gotten to a point that I know that if we look at the checkmate patterns, you're just going to get a hang of it eventually. Now, there's some checkmate in twos that are actually very, very difficult, and sometimes even grandmasters actually miss it. So if you can't find a checkmate in two, don't feel bad, right? Because sometimes grandmasters miss, because sometimes also you're going to see that the checkmates might not be starting with a check, so you have to think very smartly. Now let's just move. So we're going to play this, and this is going to be the checkmate that I showed. So see you in the next meeting.